It was an empire that rose out of the ashes of barbarian conquest, straddled 15 time zones, and swallowed 1/6 of the entire world's landmass.
The first thing to deal with is just this enormous size.
Fueled by 400 years of chaos, the Russian Empire was forged by a lion's den of larger-than-life czars, whose tyrannical designs were as colossal as the country itself.
She wrote to one of her correspondents, "I can't stop myself from building. Building is like a disease. It's almost like alcoholism."
These visionaries would drive Russia's rise to greatness, adapting foreign technologies to seize power, capture territory, and engineer an empire. But the same drive that fueled Russia's thirst for everlasting glory would ultimately devour its own people. (1480), Moscow. An up-and-coming Russian leader is making an unprecedented play for power. His name is Ivan III. For centuries, his people have been under the thumb of Eurasia's most brutal conquerors, a Mongol sect called the Tatars. But now, Ivan III would gamble everything to take them down. In one move, he tears up the pact, binding him to the Tatars, and declares Russia his. In the balance hangs the future of the Russian people. If Ivan loses, it means his life. If he wins, Russia will become the land of the czars.
Hello, I'm Peter Weller. Some say the history of Russia is a history of its great cities. Now, what we think of as Russia today actually began in the 9th century when a very diverse people started to coalesce around a single dominant clan called the Kievan Rus. The Kievan Rus were from the Ukraine, but they migrated here to a very forested area around many rivers and lakes and started a small trading hamlet called Novgorod, meaning new city. Oral tradition tells us that life in Novgorod was so chaotic and so tumultuous that the people actually invited a Viking warrior named Rurik from across the Baltic Sea to come here and establish order.
In Novgorod, the Kievan Rus flourished. They borrowed the religion and building technology of their neighbors, the Byzantines, to build new cities and towns as the population spread. One of these outposts, located in the fertile heart of Western Russia, was called Moscow.
Moscow, whose date of founding is officially given as 1147, was a small, essentially log fort on a river by the name of Moscow, Moskva.
As their cities developed, the Kievan Rus became known as Russians. But with no unified ruler or defenses, Russian cities were prime targets for invasion by the era's most aggressive conquerors, the Tatars. 1237, the Tatars charged across the Volga River with 120,000 riders. The early Russians were no match for this seasoned militia. For nearly 24 months, the Tatars devastated Russia. But for the rulers of Moscow, the invasion was an opportunity to buy favor with the invaders and rebuild better than before.
Moscow's rise started in the 14th century, very clever, cunning, ruthless politics on the part of the Grand Princes of Moscow, who managed to ingratiate themselves with the Tatar masters and achieve the ability to collect taxes from the other Russian principalities.
Under the protection of the Tatars, Moscow began to bleed its Russian brothers dry, swallowing up neighboring territories to form a single Muscovite state. But its leaders were still forced to pay off their hated Tatar overlords. All that would change in 1462 with Ivan III. Ivan came to power determined to end Tatar domination of Russia. He takes the title Grand Prince of all Russia and begins to plot an overthrow of the Tatars.
Ivan, I think, had all of the characteristics he needed to be a good and successful Tsar and to earn the title the Great. He was ambitious, he was opportunistic, he was ruthless, he was smart.
The new Tsar would hit the ground running. He marries into the empire that had given Russia its religion and architecture, Byzantium. With this alliance in place, Ivan adopts the Byzantine symbol of the two-headed eagle and declares Russia the Third Rome. Then in 1472, he begins to lay down his engineering legacy. He commissions a new cathedral to be built as an unmistakable sign that Russia was now a force to be reckoned with. Workers began construction on the massive project in the early 1470s. But Mother Nature had other ideas. In 1474, a small tremor shook Moscow. 2 years of construction on the mighty church collapsed into a pile of rubble. Built crudely of heavy stone on insufficient foundations, it was an accident waiting to happen. But Ivan would turn disaster into opportunity.
At this point, Ivan III does what any shrewd ruler would do: find the best people. And the best people of that period, the 15th century, were in Italy.
Ivan finds one Aristotle Fioravanti. Fioravanti was known as a skilled master architect throughout Italy. But before he could re-engineer Moscow's cathedral, he had to completely demolish the site. In the first of several innovations, Fioravanti uses siege technology in the form of a battering ram to raise the ruins of the church.
And that amazed the Muscovites. What they'd taken months to erect unsuccessfully, he was able to batter down in 3 weeks.
Fioravanti then got to work building the cathedral. Today we know it as the Cathedral of the Assumption. He began by using ancient Russian limestone churches as his model, but infused the construction with Western building technology. The result revolutionized Russian architecture.
We start with the foundation. Instead of the rubble-filled trench, which was typical of early medieval Russian building, he cleared the trench and put large oak pilings, which are much more stable means of supporting the building, so that the building doesn't later crack or deform in ways that will lead it to ultimately collapse.
From there, Fioravanti's innovations expanded. Instead of using stacked pieces of limestone poorly mortared together, he arranges his limestone blocks in an interlocking bond to make them more stable. With his walls completed, he next turns to the delicate and dangerous operation of building the heavy vaulted ceilings.
When you begin to vault the roof, there's an enormous amount of weight coming down on those walls. So the third element that he introduced was iron tie rods. Well, they were just iron rods that were inserted in the masonry and extended across at the level of the vaulting. It serves as an additional form of support. It ties the structure together.
Last, instead of building the church's rounded cupolas and drums in heavy stone, he introduced the use of lighter and sturdier brick, teaching his Russian builders how to fire and lay this new material.
So that from the pilings to the wall bonding, to the tie rods, to the upper structure, Fioravanti